Hi there, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. It's Wednesday. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Go ahead and jump on our chat today. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, good to see you.
Hey, Naj. Weren't we just here? I think we were.
Seriously, you and I want to think it might have been Scott Smith, our loyal viewer over at ABC Unified, who suggested that maybe this does need to become a daily show at some point.
We'll take that into consideration. Right?
We'll see what the bosses say about that. Yeah. Hey, go ahead and jump in as we said on the chat. We already see Aaron Castro is there. Maria Thompson, our great board member, Gary Reller over in Riverside Unified. So good to see all of you. We got a packed show today. We're going to go in kind of a unique pattern here because we're going to be talking about the proposal, the school reopening plan that is going to be voted on at the Capitol. Edgar's here to answer as many questions as humanly possible. We've got a member of his governmental relations team, Iván Carrillo, who's going to join us as well. So get your questions ready because we're going to do rapid fire, trying to answer as many questions as possible before we hit the bottom of the hour. Edgar, we want to thank, of course, the 1,200 members who joined us for the breaking news on Monday when we brought this to you. I want to give you some highlights as we have them about this school reopening plan, because if you think about it, Edgar, and I think you would agree, Monday to Wednesday has given us the opportunity to see more of what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean, as we said on Monday, it's a risk we take. I think it's a good risk. I don't think we completely messed it up, or no one's called us out if we did mess it up on Monday. But we do take a bit of a risk, jumping on, trying to go on air while we're digesting some of the news. Like I said, we got some early previews, and we trust our friends in the Capitol and the governor's office. But we're skeptics. We have to see it with our own eyes. We have to actually see the language. So we were processing it while we came on at 12. I usually don't get alarmed on here. I think when the number kept going up, I was like, uh-oh, we better get some of this right because people have a lot of questions. And then I know many of our friends joined us at 3 o'clock where we try to answer as many questions. I mean, I think the big takeaway is folks trying to wrap their heads around them. And I can only imagine from the perspective of our practitioners. Obviously, we came on, I think, on Monday with a pseudo celebratory tone, right? That we had got some movement on this front. And I'm still very proud of that, of the work that ACSA and our members did. I think in the days that have gone, I myself have turned into implementation mode, right? Like, how can we help our folks make sense of all this? How can we answer as many questions? I've got countless emails in my inbox. If I haven't responded to anybody, my apologies. But really, folks trying to be like, okay, what does this mean about our reopening plan? Do I have to tweak my dates? Does this situation apply for us? So that's why we kind of thought, hey, we talked about it Monday. We talked about a couple instances. We know people are still probably in that space. Just based on what we've dealt with the last couple of times, there's big announcements. People need to hear it a few times. So say, let's try to get at this and answer as many questions as we can and help in whatever way we can.
Well, look, folks, if Edgar hasn't responded to your text or phone call or email, I just had to remind him of an email I sent to him last week that he did not respond to. So just keep it in perspective. The man is a little bit busy.
Yeah, email is not my strong suit. I aim to get better, I'm really appreciative of just our folks just trying to get answers, right? They're trying, and again, respecting the fact that they're trying to answer questions from their community, from the news. I've seen articles being written about situations. Are we going to be eligible for the funding or whatnot? So I see it as a responsibility for us, right? To just try to help our folks as much as we can.
Yeah, I want to point out Gary Railer has our first question. We'll get to that in just a second. Also want to point out our loyal viewer, Angela Shell, saying hello from Eureka, acknowledges we're in day 2 of in-person learning and it's going really well. So that is definitely good news. We know so many districts right now are moving closer and closer to in-person learning. Let me give you some highlights of what this looks like, and then we'll move from there. $2 billion in Prop 98 funding available for school districts offering in-person instruction by April 1. In-person instruction requirements differ depending on the county tier as defined by the blueprint for a safer economy. Districts currently offering in-person instruction do not need to modify their plans to be eligible for the funding. An additional $4.6 billion will be distributed to all school districts proportionally based on LCFF, with an additional $1,000 for each homeless student intended for learning recovery. The majority of that $4.6 billion will have broad flexibility and can be used for in-person programs and services through August 31 of 2022. And then let me just go through this collective advocacy piece, Edgar. All collective bargaining requirements have been removed. COVID-19 testing cadence requirements were dramatically curtailed to be limited to schools in the state's purple tier on the blueprint. Schools looking to expand in-person services will have less stringent pathways to exit that purple tier. Schools currently offering in-person instruction are not required to take additional actions or abide by the new conditions, and vaccinations are prioritized for educators, but staff vaccination is not a condition for returning to in-person instruction. Advocacy works, Edgar. That is something that we have said consistently since you and I began hearing about this legislative deal on Sunday night. What else have we learned from what I just said over these last couple of days?
Yeah, I think those are the big pieces in terms of just the detail. And I think our observation of that, our initial analysis of it has come true. I think we were worried about the grandfathering piece. How does it actually look in practice? Is there going to be any other requirements for those schools that have already been serving kids? We wanted to drill in on the details of the testing. How is this going to work? I know there's still some questions about transitions. You know, like I'm in purple now, but then we're talking about April 1st. So how does that work? I will say this right now, and I can't say this in strong enough terms. We don't give a lot of advice on this show, right? It's not our role necessarily to give advice. You guys are the experts, not us. But I will say this. I think everybody here should really plan on that their school districts, for the most part, are going to be in the red tier at least when this reopening happens. And I think all the requirements, and we could get into that again. I'm sure somebody's going to ask the question about, remind me, who do we have to serve under the specific tier? But this has been instilled at us very strongly for a couple reasons. One, the COVID rates continue to drop, right? As vaccinations are going up, as case rates. Yesterday, I forget the name, the amount of counties that now entered into the red, more restrictive tier, where now secondary schools are allowed to open. I think all the projections from the state is that we're going to continue to going in that direction. The fact that we've been talking about counties like LA County, I know there's just weeks ago where we questioned, will LA County ever be able to get out of purple?
Right.
And now they're on the cusp. So I think the one piece on planning that's really important is that everybody should plan. Although the requirements on purple are important, the cohorts, that depending when your reopening date actually happens and you're required to who the students you're going to serve, I think it's important that you go in with the perspective that you're going to be in that less restrictive tier. And again, there's talk, and this is all I could say on this front. There's word on the street, let's call it, that there could be some changes. I know Wes alluded to it the other day. We've talked about it. That I know there's conversations about the blueprint. What is the role of the blueprint? We get asked this all the time on this show in terms of, as vaccinations are going up, as the health metrics going up, is the blueprint going to stay the same? I think that's something we also have to be cognizant of. So if more districts come out of purple. So anyway, right off the bat, if we didn't emphasize that strong enough on Monday, it's just from the planning purpose. It's not just where you're at today, is where your district is going to be depending on your reopening date here in the weeks to come.
All right, so let's get these rapid fire questions here, because I know we've got a lot of them, and I'm seeing from my staff behind the scenes, and if I am incorrect, then leave it as is. But I understand that Iván Carrillo, ACSA legislative advocate, may actually have just joined us. If he is here, go ahead and bring him on up so we can go ahead and include him in the conversation. All right, Iván is here. Iván, right out of a very exciting meeting. I know.
Oh my gosh.
I know that is the case. Iván, how are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Good. Okay.
I was just trying to talk a lot to make sure to give Iván time to get here. It looks like I did just enough, because the reality is I didn't want to answer all the questions myself. So
that's right. That's right. All right, folks, here you go. 20 minutes, rapid fire. Here come the questions. Gary Reller, our loyal viewer over at Matthew Gage Middle School in Riverside Unified. He asks, are the dollars inside or outside of Prop 98? Edgar, let's go ahead and answer that.
Yeah. Yes, the dollars are Prop 98. And that was one of the pieces that, full transparency is part of our advocacy. We didn't believe that some of those dollars should be going for health purposes, namely for COVID testing or whatnot. And that was something we beat the drum on a lot. Ultimately, these are Prop 98 dollars that are going invested on here. Their way of addressing this issue of the concerns about how Prop 98 dollars are being spent is that this is also being coupled with all of the federal dollars that we're also getting in, right? So to our concern that, yes, is it appropriate for Prop 98 dollars to be spent on these health mitigation pieces? There is now these other dollars coming in, but the short answer is yes, there are Prop 98 dollars that are being spent.
All right, and Iván, for both of you guys, if I hit one particular topic that you guys have particular knowledge of, go ahead and just jump in. Jennifer Earl Foss asks, any update on CASP testing?
Yes, and I can't remember. I'm losing my weeks now. I think Diana may have come on. Maybe she came on a
couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. So here's kind of the deal on that. The state board took action. They punted a little bit. They're going to try to find a compromise here. The federal government had says that they're not going to issue a blanket waiver. So just say no testing. The state is looking specifically at that language about whether there is a pathway to say, ask the feds, look, given our situation in California, that we have a lot more schools that are still in distance learning, do we have a pathway to still maybe get a little bit more relief? If that doesn't work, then getting some of these other flexibilities in place that would modify, whether it be the testing schedule, make more accommodations. There's going to be another state board meeting in a couple weeks, so there'll be more to come. But there was some action preliminarily taken last week.
Hey, Iván, but as we're getting more questions in, and folks, go ahead and keep jumping in with your questions. Again, we're going rapid fire until the bottom of the hour. Iván, I know that you have had experience working with the ed options, the business services, career technical education committees and councils. From those standpoints, have you heard from members in any of those particular groups about their reaction to this school reopening plan and maybe how that impacts their specific work?
Yeah, certainly. One of the ones I'll focus on is adult education. So we've been outreach to a number of times, wondering how these two funding pots interplay and intersect with adult education. And these two pots are focused on TK to 12. They're not for adult education and serving students in adult ed. But I will say that we continue to advocate for adult ed receiving the compounded COLA that LCFF is going to receive, the 3.84%, and making sure that adult ed does receive that. So there are efforts outside of these two specific proposals that intersect with adult ed and CTE and other specific programs.
Marites Fermin asks, what happens to basic aid? Reopening incentive is $450 per ADA, but we receive an estimate and it is only $265 ADA. What's the reasoning behind that?
Oh, and I don't know, Iván, we had actually this question on the webinar, and we had one of our colleagues who represents the community funded districts try to answer this. So I think they were trying to dig in on that piece of it. I think that's one that's specific enough where we can follow up. Iván, anything you would add on that?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I mean, my thought is maybe in terms of the assumption of participation. So in earlier proposals, I think there was a recognition that a number of districts, a sizable number of districts, were going to opt out and not participate. Every district is receiving money under this proposal. There is no opt out, and it's adjusted at a later time frame whether or not conditions are met. So I'm wondering if maybe that's the reason for the revised, reduced estimate, but we certainly can get clarity on that and circle back.
Edgar, Kristen Noonan asks, can you please clarify the timeline that the CDPH reclassifies tier colors since more counties are starting to make progress? I believe it was 7 counties that moved from purple to red yesterday. Is it 3 weeks of meeting the less restrictive tier data before a county is reclassified? Or is it 1 week? It's moving quickly. And obviously it can be confusing, not just for educators, but everybody.
Yeah, I'm glad actually we got this question because this is one of the pieces that I think we've been able to kind of put our head around a little bit more, even though from Monday. So current guidelines is in order to get reclassified to the less restrictive tier, you have to hit those health metrics for 2 consecutive weeks. You have to meet your positivity rate and the case count per 100,000. So for example, right now, to be in red, it has to be below 7 per 100,000, coupled with a positivity rate. I think it's under 8%, if I'm not mistaken. So we got the question a number of times on Monday. So is there no transition? So in other words, if I am going to be in red, am I just going to know? So we went back and did a little bit of digging, and we're going to continue to push on this issue that the bill doesn't spell anything out specifically in terms of a waiting period. You have X amount of days. Kind of the expectation, or at least the intent, there might be more coming on this, is there's a lag in the numbers. So your county usually knows before they reclassify. They announce the tiers every Tuesday, who's going to go up and down. But most county public health officers do know already if they're going to go. And so I think the advice the state is giving, that some of that planning process in terms of moving up a tier, or moving down, I should say, because it's less restrictive, that you will have a few weeks notice that your county is starting to meet the metrics and that you will be eligible to go back into the red. One of the things that's key that they changed, before there used to be a guideline that once you met the metric for 3 weeks for red, that you had to wait an additional 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Even before this legislative deal, they had already modified that, so you would actually become eligible the very next Wednesday. So you go in red on Tuesday, that Wednesday you're actually eligible to bring back secondary students or whatnot. So I know that's still going to be a bit challenging, and we're going to continue to push on this because it still feels pretty aggressive, even with the couple-week warning, but that's how it's kind of working.
Tanya Kraus jumps in from Scotts Valley Unified. She mentions they open hybrid for the littles today. Congratulations to our educators over there at Scotts Valley Unified. She asks, can you clarify what might need to be board approved to be eligible for money? Now, this is a really interesting question because there are a lot of moving parts to be able to get the funding, to have that financial backing here. Either one of you jump in, but at what point does the board need to approve particulars?
You want to get that one?
So let me take the expanded learning opportunities grant portion of that, because it's different for both pots. But you do have to adopt an expenditure plan that outlines how you're going to utilize these funds that you receive. Demonstrate evidence of informing students and families of the different opportunities that exist, evidence of engaging all the different stakeholders, your staff, your teachers, parent groups, and submit that to the Department of Ed. The Department of Ed is going to release a template. They have 3 weeks from Thursday to release that template that will be utilized for you to demonstrate that. I mean, that does have to be board approved.
I could touch on the $2 billion piece. So I know this gets a little confusing because there's a requirement on the testing cadence, and then there's a requirement just total. So for the testing cadence, it does talk about that the plan, not the COVID safety plan, but just your opening plan, which could be your COVID safety plan, that it needs to be adopted in terms of what that plan is going to be. If you had a plan by March 31st, a board adopted plan, even if you're in purple, you don't have to do testing. So that's on the testing side. For the drawing down the funding, on that piece of it, essentially, if you've already posted your COVID safety plan, your checklist, you met those requirements, how we're interpreting that is that you have already met the requirements, that you don't need to take any further action. I know it's kind of semantics in some communities where they are either having their board adopted or give the rubber stamp, and obviously that's a safer piece to go about it, but that's how they differentiate the requirements in the bill.
Shannon O'Brien asks, one of the groups that districts must offer in-person instruction to is disengaged students. So how does SB 86 define disengaged students, chronically absent students, or local decision? I know that we had mentioned in the notes at the top that there was going to be extra financial incentive for homeless students intended for learning recovery, $1,000 for each student. But as far as the disengaged, chronically absent, how is this moving?
Yeah, disengaged is another one of the prioritized pupil groups that must be served with the funding pots. And so disengaged pupil is defined by a student being absent 3 or more days or 60% of instructional days in a given week. So that is defined in statute.
Let me get to this one. C. Walker, can you cover the 1% penalty per day and how spring break impacts that? Are you only penalized for the days you are doing distance learning and not in-person learning?
Yeah. So Iván can definitely help me with this one. I'll start with try to get this right. The statute specifies that from April 1st to May 15th, every day that you're not offering in-person instruction under the required tier, depending, who you're serving, if you're in red or whatnot, if you're serving those students, that you would lose a proportional 1% amount per the grant amount, whatever that amount was going to be. For every day, you would lose a 1%. We haven't done the math about this, but let's say if you don't open till close to May 15th, like let's say you're on the 14th of May, I think it probably amounts to about 30% of the grant or so, but I could be wrong on that math. That's roughly what I'm thinking, because that's instructional days. And the instructional, so it's not calendar days either. It's instructional days. And that gets to the spring break question, which is a great question. I've seen this come up a ton of times. You don't get penalized if April 1st falls in the middle of your spring break. So if your first instructional day, and if I looked at a calendar, I would know what this is, probably like the 4th or the 5th, which I know a lot of districts will be in that situation. As long as you're offering the in-person instruction on those days, you would be eligible for the full amount there. So you don't get penalized for spring break. Iván, did I mess that up anyway?
That's correct, and you were right. It's at up to 30%, because if it is instructional days, and that's the maximum amount if you were not to have any calendared breaks during that time frame.
Hey, we got this question from Ann Egan Hubbard, and I think this is an interesting question because we definitely need clarity, because there are a lot of school districts that already have in-person learning going. She asks, schools which were already serving students in person will have the opening funds as well, correct? What is the answer on that?
That is a simple question, and I'm glad to be, well, no, it's not a simple question, because it took us a long 2 months to make this a simple answer. So that's a good way to put it. Yes, they are eligible. As long as you're hitting those students that you're supposed to be served. If you're already open, you get the funding. And this was a long road to get to this point, because the early iterations of this proposal, as you might remember, it did ask districts to go back and get a CBA or MOU or potentially do different things in terms of the testing cadence. So this was one of our priorities, and I'm proud to say we were successful on this end. So I'm glad to say that it's now a simple answer there, that yes, they would be eligible.
I have this from Nancy Henkel Nauman. Sorry, Nancy, if I mispronounced that. Seems that most of this push is for elementary school. Is there wiggle room or changes to secondary schools? Now, we know, because most of the state has been in purple for some time, that when they reach a certain number, they could start bringing in the early elementary students for some type of in-person learning. It's happening here in Elk Grove Unified over these next few weeks. What is up next for secondary schools?
So there is a requirement in here as a condition for getting the reopening funds, that one secondary grade, secondary being middle or high school grade, be offered in-person instruction as when you get to the red tier. So once again, for districts moving into the red tier or those on the cusp of it, you should be planning to offer in-person instruction to at least one grade level to continue to meet the conditions of the bill and be eligible for the full grant amount.
And if I could just add a piece on this, as Iván said, the one grade level, and that was the first time, this was new language, we hadn't seen in the governor's proposal, we hadn't seen in the legislative proposal a couple weeks back now. So this piece, I think so we could read between the lines in terms of what they're trying to get at, that because the thought is you're going to be in red, for most counties are going to be in red by these deadlines. They want districts to at least start the reopening for secondary. And we've been telling, obviously you folks know this, that requires a whole other plan that's challenging because of the stable cohorts. Takes a lot more planning, right, on that end. With that said, I know there's been an emphasis, and we get questions every week about, well, what about secondary and middle and high school? So I think this key, when you're in red, you have to, in addition to your TK through 6 and your specialized cohorts, or your prioritized cohorts, I should say, that you have to bring at least one grade in. That's your choice. It doesn't have to be 7th grade. As we were joking on Monday, I'm a parent of a 7th grader, so obviously I vote for 7th, but it doesn't have to be 7th grade. You can choose whatever grade you want there. I think that the reality there, it's trying to incentivize bringing back, whether it be all of middle school or a larger chunk of high school. I think that's the direction most LEAs will go in, as opposed to literally just bringing in one grade.
And as we get closer here to the bottom of the hour, I just want to acknowledge all of the questions that have come in. We are taking them down because I can almost guarantee we're going to be hitting this very same subject next week when we do have more clarity on the final product, if it is passed tomorrow at the state capitol. The vote happens tomorrow on this proposal. So if we don't get to your question, just know we are taking them down, and we will make sure that we find answers for you. Edgar, let me ask you this question, because we received this a lot during our broadcast on Monday. This one comes in from Cheryl Cheney Hunt. Can you elaborate on the grandfathered in status for schools that have been open and the safe schools review process specific to 4 feet distance CDPH guidelines?
Yeah, this is the question of the week, right? So I think this comes in 2 parts. So per the incentive grant, the legislation, whatever you were doing before then, whatever your plan was, you can continue to do that and be eligible for the funding. That's the spirit of the grandfathering piece. Specific to the 4 feet, and actually 4 feet's an interesting number because the new guidelines, which I know caused a lot of angst, continue to cause a lot of angst, it said that physical distancing had to be between 4 and 6 feet, no less than 4 feet. The interpretation we've gotten many, many times is 4 feet, you're fine. If you're at 4 feet, you're meeting the guideline, which has nothing to do with this bill. That's now the public health order. Below 4 feet is where a number of LEAs are now having to go through this review process, where they go to the Safe Schools team. You show them what you've been doing is safe, that you haven't had transmission. We know that process in itself has caused a little bit of angst because the state is coming back in some situations asking folks to do a bit more. So it's a little different than what we're talking about here with the bill. Here's what I'll say about the physical distancing requirements. And this wasn't touched on in the bill. Obviously, there hasn't been any changes. This is where ACSA is going to come in. This is our next focal point. We hear you loud and clear that you cannot transition from a hybrid to offering more in-person instruction, even if you're trying to open up your middle schools and secondary schools, that this is a challenge. So one of the things we're going to be asking the state, as vaccinations go up, as transmission rates go down, there should be some consideration now. What's the expiration date on some of the physical distancing requirements? Because if not, you're kind of locking in our folks that they can't do much more than that. And so I think we're going to have a willing ear there. I'm not sure how quick some of this is going to happen, but this is something that we're going to be all over in the weeks and months to come.
Hey, Iván, I know that on our chat, where everything's getting posted, I know that there was one question there that got your attention. Do you know which one that was?
Yeah, there was a question seeking clarity related to the 1% penalty and which pot of money it would apply to. And it only applies to the in-person incentivizing dollars, not the extended learning fund.
All right, folks, there you go. We've just crossed that bottom of the hour. Iván, do me a favor. Block out 1 o'clock next week. Okay. Just go ahead and block it out now. And no meetings. No, even if the boss wants to meet with you, it doesn't matter.
Now I'm going to have to bump our special guest that I had lined up for next week. Now they'll have to wait another week.
They'll have to wait another week. Edgar always has special guests up his sleeve. Iván Carrillo, ACSA Legislative Advocate. Iván, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, just want to give you 2 programming notes. First off, tomorrow, ACSA Campus Tour begins at 10 a.m. On ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. We have Chris Hoffman, the superintendent from Elk Grove Unified School District, on the show tomorrow. For those of you who may not remember, Elk Grove Unified was the first district to close in the state due to the COVID-19 pandemic almost this time last year. He'll talk a little bit about what he has learned over this year, what the big challenges are coming up, because the early elementary grades are getting ready to come back to in-person learning over the next couple of weeks. Also, his best practices for staying positive during that time. That is tomorrow. ACSA Campus Tour with Chris Hoffman. Don't miss that. Also, Edgar, I'm going to give you a chance to plug it. Ledge Action Day, April 12th and 13th. Free event. It's you and me. It's like this show on steroids. 2 days of it. What do we have planned for that?
Yeah, just like everything else in this last 12 months, we're taking a new look at how we do things. So I'm actually excited. It's all going to be virtual, obviously. And I think more than ever before, it's going to be open to folks that want to participate. So the speakers that we bring in, the legislators, the policymakers, folks that we can come in and actually do direct lobbying, we're going to have open doors here. And that's the beauty. All of us were frustrated when we had to move to this method of just doing business, right? We miss seeing each other in person. We miss having our members at the Capitol, but I think we're going to make the most of it. And I actually think it's going to give us an opportunity for more folks to participate in Ledge Action Day than ever have before.
Yeah, free virtual event. Register now, ACSA.org. You'll see the opportunity right there on the homepage to register for Ledge Action Day, ACSA.org. Edgar, we got something going on at the Capitol tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll probably have some things to talk about next week. So
we probably will. Exactly. Edgar, good seeing you, man.
As always, Naj.
Thank you, folks, so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're back next Wednesday, 1 p.m., live and interactive. We'll see you next week.